So me and Tom and Steve and Alice and Tony Way, who you see in at least one of these films, met doing Edinburgh Fringe Festival in the kind of, I don't know, back in the 1890s.
We all came to London at a similar time when we were in our early 20s and were doing comedy on the scene and on the circuit, and we did lots of shows together. It's quite a small scene.
Like a lot of things, it sort of always looks like a clique from outside, and then when you're in it, it just feels like a bunch of people who know one another.
Steve and I, in about 1999, just started doing double act stuff together.
We were friends, and that kind of informs. It was a social group, and we sort of cross-pollinated quite a lot, and we all did little bits in each other's live shows.
Because we sort of met when we were all kind of quite young and excited about doing comedy, and we all started working together. There's a sort of shorthand and a trust, I think.
And so that's carried forward into this latest, you know, the world of film.
It's a strange thing that all these people who kind of vaguely know one another, or sometimes know one another quite well, are making all these films at the same time.
I don't think it's a coincidence that we're all doing quite strange comedy, and then now we're all doing quite strange films.
Yeah, I just think there must have been some sort of terrifying experiment at some point in the 80s, or they put something in the water or something that's only just bearing terrible fruit. I don't know what the explanation of that is, but yeah, it's very pleasing.
Is it going to be horrible?
Yep. You're always looking for ideas for films, and I thought, especially at that moment in time in my life where I'd done a succession of scripts that have just got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to do, to actually have, there's an idea set in one location, and it's a ritual to make manifest your guardian angel, and that's bonkers, and that's sufficiently bonkers to build a story around. So that was my starting point.
I'd want it immediately.
I knocked a draft off working at 10 pages a day in about nine days. I wanted this idea that, you know, they were doing a dark thing squirreled away somewhere in the edge of civilization.
This is your last chance to back out.
Seal it.
And we drafted for a year. We didn't even though it's a low-budget script, we treated it properly to finesse it, to get the arcs right, to get everything right.
Liam knew exactly what he was doing. He thought it all through, mapped it out so precisely. I was really impressed with how he put it all together. But it all comes from the characters, really, and the way he builds the tension and the dynamic between them.
I'm taking the language of social realism and then using that as a basis to make the magic more real. So I wanted someone who was grounded. What I wanted was the idea that he was a working class kid off the council estates who'd found this avenue and gone off and empowered himself at the expense of everything.
I've done this 3 times. Once it worked, twice it didn't.
I really responded to the script because Liam had written this character that was a shaman, yet he wrote him just like a bloke. He was like and that really appealed to me because he was a very sort of very ordinary, rough around the edges sort of guy, but had these amazing, weird skills. People get into all sorts of things, don't they? He could be obsessed about sport. He could be obsessed about whatever, you know. But he happened to be obsessed about magic. Just a very intense and damaged person who has become a bit of a bully himself, and but with a heart, hopefully.
We have to progress very carefully from now on.
People often play occultists in films and in literature and what have you. It's a bored aristocrat is generally the thing. So we're playing against that. It's to unsettle the audience. It's to take what should be solid ground and turn it into quicksand. So you don't quite know where you are, what is true. It unsettles us and unshackles us from reality.
I'm going to unshackle the house from the world.
What I want to do is build this pressure cooker. In lots of films, what they do is they build you up and then boomf, and then they drop you. You know what I mean? So you get relief and there's a catharsis there. I just keep going like that. So I never give you that kind of, that relief, that catharsis. So it gets really, really uncomfortable, but I do it incrementally throughout the film.
So this is my first big, serious role. That was the biggest challenge for me, was to get through that and become, think of it in entirely an actorly way, no comedy to fall back on. It was a challenge physically, yeah. It was really difficult because we were in a filthy house in Dublin for a month doing a ritual, you know. It looked just like it did in the film. You know, it was filthy, there was no toilets, you know, it's that sort of thing.
Well, the ritual does act as the backbone for the plot. It's what it's grounded in. It's almost an ideal low-budget idea because a house in one location is really a road movie. You're hitting certain things, you've got beats and things within it. But the ritual thing is also great because it gives you a visual side, you know? It gives you scope for beauty.
Brilliant, like your style.
When you read books about how to write horror films or how to write, they say the enemy has got to be, or the supernatural forces, is clearly defined, yeah? The most scary thing is when they're not defined at all, when you are staring into an abyss. You're not staring at a bad, you're staring at an open door. And that's what's scary.
I think it's all the better for not having jumps and scares and cheesy things. It really gets inside you.
It's still astonishing to me that I made a film that was in my head, you know, and now here we are, for instance, talking about it, and critics are talking about it, and audiences are talking about it. And sometimes you sit down of an evening and think, God, I did that. I mean, obviously with all the help of everybody, but it's still, it's a kind of humbling thing. I would describe it as a horror film, and horror fans will get a lot out of it if they keep watching till the end.
Righty-tighty. I'll give you the greatest hit, shall I?
I had an idea for something like The Ghoul for years, and it was just kind of on the pile of ideas, just marked kind of, well, you know, someday, good luck with that. And then it just became very, very clear to me that no one was going to give me any money to make a film, like ever. And so I started to think, well, maybe I should make something, a more obviously low-budget idea. So myself and Tom Meaton, who co-produced the film, just set about going through it, just going, okay, how much of this can we do on a extremely low budget? And the answer was hardly any of it. So we would cut things like opening scene, there'd be lots of forensics and kind of bodies and crime scene photographers, so that had to go.
Here's the head scratcher. When he gets shot, he don't fall down.
Stripping all that stuff away that you'd do if you had a few £1 million just seemed to kind of help the film.
We sort of grew up, if you like, in those formative years doing quite silly character comedy. So the Ghoul script was actually sort of, took my breath away a bit because it was sort of in a bit of a different world to much of that. And then to be asked to play the lead in a proper big drama like that was obviously going to be a challenge. I'd never done anything like that before. I'd done hardly any drama, really. So I was very excited, but also a bit scared by the idea. Getting involved in the producing of it almost came naturally, and that's the sort of collaboration of working together and working on the script a bit as well.
Can you tell me what you like to get out of these sessions?
I grew up loving, you know, science fiction and horror, but as an adult, which I suppose is what I am, I love a mystery. So I wanted to do a detective story. And I don't know how aware I was of this, but we realised that it was an idea about mental health and mental illness. But I'm told that people aren't like queuing around the block at multiplexes to watch films about depression. So we thought it was a good idea to wrap up some of those kind of grimmer, more difficult subjects in this sort of more nifty genre packaging of a thriller.
Hey, Kath.
Jesus Christ.
It was a lot of hard work, and in fact the actual shooting of it, which we shot for sort of roughly 2 weeks, that was almost the easiest bit, and that was the most fun bit. We didn't know quite how it was going to turn out, but that was sort of like, let's do this, and there's an energy to that. You're doing it on a low budget, everyone's in it together, and that's what happens on a low budget film as well, that everyone all pulls in.
You went in too deep and they flipped you, and now you can't get out.
I think Tom's just a very likeable screen presence, and I knew that, but what I didn't know was that he was going to be a convincing, cool cop. And it's a really nuanced performance. Tom was previously known as somebody who was very wild and expansive on stage. Some of the stuff he's done with Noel Fielding and a lot of the stuff that his solo stuff and the stuff he used to do with Steve Oram was, you know, a big, broad brushstrokes characters. Whereas here, he can't do any of that. If you get that kind of hyper energy and you just bottle it, you get something very implosive and very intense.
I was very conscious of not doing too much with my face, internalise it. So it's a lot of the anguish that the character Chris is feeling is on the inside. So yeah, for me it was quite a challenge to rein it in, to rein my face in.
Are you okay?
Because we've got a cast of, in the nicest possible sense, a bunch of clowns in this film. They bring a humour to the film, and they also bring, I think, maybe a kind of sense of danger that's kind of hard to put your finger on. There's just that slight edge that, you know, Alice Lowe or Dan Skinner or Rufus Jones, they kind of bring this kind of unpredictability.
What they're doing is creating a universe of the mind. They are gods.
Our ambitions were, let's get it on in a cinema somewhere, just as a sort of formality to try and get a couple of reviews. So we just couldn't be happier that it's found this kind of exposure and getting to the right audience as well.
I think that it's just unique. It's a unique film, really, and I think Gareth tried to make something utterly original, and I think that sort of shines through. So it's a combination of it being a sort of really original idea and the way we went about it, I think, also shines through, because there's a sort of depiction of London as well as a sort of almost like a character gnawing away at you. A lot of these things, they come from the heart as well, and I think Gareth put a lot of his heart and soul into the writing and making of the Ghoul.
That's the most pleasing thing about the film, is that I get the sense that some people can watch it more than once and it's a different experience every time you watch it.
It was a very fast turnaround, it had to be. I had made a film called Black Mountain Poets with Jamie Adams in 5 days, which I wasn't sure you could make a feature in that short space of time. But it worked really well and the film was well received, and Jamie said, "Do you want to do another film?" And I was 6 months pregnant by that stage. I'd been wanting to direct a film for ages and it was just very slow in development, and suddenly this opportunity comes to me. And it was kind of pretty much an open thing where, you know, it could be whatever I wanted. So I went back to the company and said, "I've got an idea. It's a bit crazy. It's like a pregnant woman taking revenge. We could call it Prevenge. We won't actually call it that, but don't worry, I'll think of a much better title." And I came up with a pitch and they were like, "We love it." And I was like, "I want to shoot it in a really short time because for continuity, exhaustion levels, because I would be 7.5 months pregnant by the time we filmed it." And I devised it as a series of two-handers.
You have absolutely no control over your mind or your body anymore. This one does. She's got all the control now.
You know, there's a lot of advice that says start talking to your child before it's born because it needs to know the sound of your voice. And I found that really weird because I was a bit like, but I can't see her yet, you know, like, she knows the sound of my voice. I'm talking all the time. I'm talking to people. But it's something about the kind of hysteria around childbirth and kind of this sense of like, you know, you've got to talk to your child or they might not learn to speak. They might end up a social freak unless you have a continuous dialogue with them all the time. And, you know, I sort of see parenting sometimes in that way where people are having this sort of, to me, like quite psychotic conversation with their child. Do you want this? Do you want that? Do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want that? Do you want that? And I'm like, just leave them alone. There's nothing wrong with a bit of silence, you know. And I kind of felt that there was this psychosis around. I'm sounding really judgmental now, but, you know, I kind of felt like you could take that to a point of insanity. And I guess that was why I started having these conversations between her and the unborn child.
Sacrifices I've had to make.
What sacrifices?
Children these days are really spoiled. Like, "Mummy, I want a PlayStation. Mummy, I want you to kill that man."
A bit like if Gollum was the lead character. It's like a split personality or, you know, how to get ahead in advertising. So that definitely helped in terms of like structuring the film. And then, you know, really it was up to us how much we pushed it in the edit of how much you actually hear from the baby.
Don't want to know what's in there.
I'm scared of her. I do think the whole industry of pregnancy and having a baby is quite a strange one. And the way that it's all sanitised and packaged as being pink and pastel and lovely, and everyone's voice goes to this strange pitch when, you know, they're talking about having a baby. It all becomes quite like this. And I was like, this is really weird. And packaging all of that with, like, the fears that I was having about maybe losing my career or losing my identity, definitely that was in my head emerging as a sort of strange experience that I was having. So actually it was a bit like someone flinging me a bit of a rescue rope or whatever to sort of say, put all those experiences in a film. And once I had put them in a film, it wasn't scary anymore, because suddenly I was working and I was living the dream. I was having a baby and making a film.
I was wondering if I could talk to you about child charity. You're insane.
The people I had my eye on are people who are kind of similar to me in that they've got a comedy background, improvisational background, and they're kind of straddling acting, serious acting and comedy. Actors like Jo Hartley, really wanted to work with her. Tom Davis, who's a brilliant improviser. So I definitely had people's personas in mind, and that did help me. You know, it's sort of nerve-wracking as an actor turned director to kind of give other actors notes. But I didn't really need to. I kind of just sort of wanted to come... I wanted people to surprise me, and I wanted them to come in and just play. The script was 70 pages long, so I was quite scared that we didn't even have a feature film. But, you know, I knew that there was lots of sequences in there which were visual, which was definitely what I wanted to do. You know, coming from a TV background, I'm like, well, people know that I can talk. But what people don't know that I want to do and aspire to is be a proper filmmaker that has visual sequences. I didn't want it to be a really dialogue-heavy film. So by the end of shooting, I was like, oh my God, have we got enough? And actually, the first cut was like 2.25 hours long. And we were all like, hooray! Thank goodness we've got like enough to make a feature film, and it's just going to be about taking the blocks out, actually, and whittling it down. And really, actually, what I was surprised about is how much the film correlates to what my vision was for it. That was more of a surprise. Some stuff was spontaneous. There's like, my favourite shot probably in the whole film was we were filming down this tunnel and this guy just walks through, and I was just like, stop. We have to get this guy on camera, and we asked him to sign a release form. To me, it's like one of my favourite moments. So there is those spontaneous visual moments, which when you're filming on a low budget, ironically, that's the thing you can get because you haven't spent loads and loads of money on another visual effect, which is what you should actually be filming. You can actually go, let's just get this. But it was kind of planned chaos. It was kind of a mixture of like, right, this is going to be really regimented. We have to film a murder now. So we've got this special effect and we've got to hide this line. And so we can only film it from this angle. So it has to be really rigid and it has to be a locked camera and it has to be, because we've got a plate and blah, blah, blah. And then other things, me going, right, we just do whatever, say whatever you like, go wherever you like. We've preset the lighting. You can walk wherever you want in this flat and the cameraman will follow you. And then other bits where we go, right, we've got a whole evening to film in Halloween. As long as I'm in this costume and I'm doing this, just keep filming and don't stop.
Ground floor, please.
So there's lots of different techniques that we were using like that pleasingly worked out okay.
It started with me thinking about film as something that involved no language and just monkey speak, because I've always been fascinated by how similar we are to primates. We are primates. There, I've said it. And so the obvious way to do it, to me, would be to have it set in a very ordinary setting. Once those two elements come together, it was very easy to write. I wrote it very quickly.
There's something about Steve's brilliant approach to making it. He's very calm. I mean, Steve was the lead and directing it, written it, produced it. You know, he did everything. He shot some of it in his house.
At its heart, it's actually quite a simple story, which is this kind of a feud between two families and a central love story. The whole thing with this film was to play it straight. The only difference being there's no dialogue. So that in itself, I think, strips away a layer of artifice.
I think that's what the film does amazingly well. It's like an explosion of expression onto the screen.
And of course, you've got people like Julian Barrett, who's the heart of the film, really, and the sadness that runs through it. And as you know, it's about the generations and how they move forward, and he's been left behind. We started doing the scenes with the actors saying the words, and then we'd throw the scripts away. But a few days in, everyone was just, I mean, pretty much people were turning up to set already speaking in ape language.
Steve didn't really put any sort of restrictions on how ape people should be, but he definitely had to direct. You had to hit certain points, definitely, and it's all there. It is all there in the script.
I wasn't very prescriptive about what people should do, how they should do it, because people found their own thing. It was quite interesting. You know, everyone watching this will have their own inner ape. I think dialogue's really overrated. Because the communication of humans is very little to do with dialogue, you know, and it's much more interesting to scrap it all. But having said that, the dialogue I wrote, because I wrote all the dialogue in the script, you know, I was so free writing it because I knew no one would ever see it, that it came out really well. So I'm a bit gutted about that.
He did write his script in English, and I read it, and it was hilarious. And I still think he's been quite purist about it and never wants to reveal the actual dialogue. But it's one of the funniest scripts I read in English.
I knew I'd be in safe hands with all of them, and I knew they'd all be brilliant. And in writing the film, I wrote most of the parts for the people that actually did them.
It was a lot of fun to do, and I think everyone was desperate to be in it, really. I was working with Noel Fielding at the time on his luxury comedy show, and he was saying, oh, yeah, Steve said that. Oh, yeah, can I be in it?
The only way I was going to get it right was to do it myself, and the freedom that gave was incredible. And that's the reason why it works, I think, just because it was one vision and done very quickly. So I was able to do it within, you know, a few months, really. It's completely funded by me. I was the costume department on it. So I was out buying, you know, stuff in Primark the day before.
I think when we were filming it, I think it was like, this is a lot of fun, but God knows how this is going to turn out. No one was quite sure. But I think even throughout that, I think the moments that and still stand out in the film were the sort of quite nuanced, sort of subtle, emotional moments that he also managed to get. And then as soon as I saw some of that footage, I was like, okay, well, this is going to work on quite a lot of different levels as well.
And I think cutting the corners actually financially gave it an edge as well, because we didn't have to, you know, bother getting loads of expensive equipment in. We just had a camera and we were just doing, you know, it's just very simple to film. You know, there wasn't a temptation to do anything fancy. We premiered it at Fright Fest, and that went great. I think horror fans responded to it because it's quite out there. Horror is a great place for it because people are so open to the strange and the weird and the wonderful. I think art is experimental, and there is a tradition of it in this country, but it's like a guilty secret. And I'm happy to be a small part of that. This is probably where these ideas will carry on. You know, in low budget filmmaking, it'd be tough to do, but it will happen. I think people will continue making, you know, out there ideas because you're so free. No one's going to tell you not to. So you do what you want. It's brilliant. It's fun. It's like being a kid. That's what I felt like when doing art. I felt like I was just playing. It was brilliant with all my mates down the park. It's literally that.
I think as a starting point, it was about the location and what was available, and then really just sort of sitting back with Finn, the producer, and kind of thinking about what kind of story we wanted to tell. So it became like a real-time journey in a sense.
We need to find shelter.
I think it's hard with very little budget to actually set out to make something and say, right, it's going to be this. You know, most of the filmmakers I've worked with, they all agree. You don't actually really know what the thing is until you sit down in the edit and you start putting it together. And I think that's quite an exciting way to work. I think when lots of money and big budgets come into play, then, you know, it's harder to do that. But with Tank 432, we definitely had a bit more freedom to experiment. I think the film itself, the premise is extremely simple. A team of people who discover something horrible whilst doing a job. They get locked inside an armoured personnel carrier. It's set against the backdrop of British countryside. So we try to find really beautiful landscapes and insects and things that are very real and reminiscent to the UK, and then set this rather awful story against that. They were real tanks that we used. There was no sets or anything like that. We couldn't afford to build a set. One is a shell that doesn't have an engine as such, and that meant that we could cut the sides off and point cameras through. Then we had another one that moved, which you see in the film, and Rupert Evans is chasing Michael Smiley around a field. But the general feel of it was just not a place you would want to spend very much time. We used a variety of wider lenses, and we used those close up, try and give a sense of just being inside somewhere horrible that you want to get out of. With a low budget, you know, you can aim as high as you want, and you should do as a filmmaker, really, but you've got to be a little bit grown up and realistic about who's going to want to be in your movie. It's about finding people that you enjoy working with and sticking with them. Film's really collaborative. Having actors that are willing to follow you into a field when it's sideways rain, do those long hours, keep that energy level up, and everybody did. Dr. Monster was designed by Dan Martin, and the idea loosely was that they've undergone this experiment and they've been released into the field. They've all got this stuff inside them, and what they're seeing is in fact just a scientist in a gas mask. But to them, and from the perspective of the characters, the audience, it looks like this hideous monster. It was there for the reason of giving them something to really run away from.
Get in! Close the hatch! Close it!
I remember picking the DVD up in a supermarket, I think it was, and I looked around for it for ages, just thinking, oh, this isn't really going to come out. And I found it, and I was like, wow, this is actually real. I can hold this in my hand. It was a really, really exciting experience. And then I wondered what would happen if I stole it. You know, if I actually took this out of the shop, and I'd probably get caught. You know, what would the conversation be? I didn't steal it. I think it's a really exciting time for independent film at the moment. You know, maybe there aren't so many schemes available. Maybe there isn't loads of money. And I think the responsibility of making stuff really lies at the heart of the filmmakers. And there are just so many people, you know, in and around the circle that I've worked with who are all kind of just making stuff. So it's a really nice kind of thing to be a small part of. I think people move in herds. You get this group of people and they're just like-minded people who are just, for some weird reason, drawn together, and they just keep turning up and just giving their kind of like spin on it. At the heart of that, I think a director like Ben Wheatley, he is a prodigy of filmmaking. He just knows how to tell a story fairly quickly, you know, him and Amy Jump, the writer. And I think that they've just come at a time when the industry's hungry for not necessarily low-budget films, but ways of using low budgets to make something that's interesting.
It's hard to get films made, and so if you're forced to go off and make a very, very low-budget film, you go, well, why compromise? No, I'm not. No one's the boss of me now. It's my money, or it's a very small amount of somebody else's money. So I may as well just do whatever the hell I please.
I wanted to see the film, so I made it, and I knew that no one else was going to do it, so I did it. And that's what we've got in common with a lot of people in this season, is that people have just done stuff because they want to see it, or they want to make it.
I think that's what's key to all these films, is that there's a certain sort of energy that's gone, right, let's just make it. We're not waiting for a green light from anybody. We're just going to go and make these films. And I think if everyone can keep that energy going, that would be very exciting.